Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Adit Ruano from the Wilderness Society, and welcome to the live Q&A for the film premiere of We Don't Give Up. We're so excited to have you join us and to be part of this conversation. Unfortunately, Anna Jane Joyner couldn't join us today, but want to send her our thoughts and really thank her for bringing us all together to have this great discussion. Before we start, I wanted to take a quick moment to do a land acknowledgement and just remind folks that we're all speaking from and about the homelands of Native peoples. We recognize Indigenous communities and cultures as traditional and continuing stewards of these lands and honor their sovereignty, especially when speaking about public lands. In particular, we want to take a moment to recognize that the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is the home and sacred land of the Gwich'in and Inupiat community people from millennia. So thank you so much for joining us, and I want to move on to our discussion. We're talking today about one of the most important issues of our time, that of the fight to protect the Arctic Refuge. The goal of this film, which was directed by two of the folks who you'll be speaking to today, was really to amplify the voices of the people who will be most harmed if Arctic Refuge is drilled, and also to share with all of you the ways in which climate change, human rights, and even colonialism is playing out in the Arctic Refuge and is directly linked to the way in which oil companies are pursuing development in places that are so sacred to so many people. And rather than speak on behalf of the folks who produced the film and on behalf of the people who are advocating for protection of the refuge, I'd like to bring some people to the table. And I'm thrilled to introduce some of the brilliant folks who are going to be part of the Q&A today and are going to be sharing their perspectives of traveling up to the refuge and experiencing it for themselves. So I will start with introducing. First, I'll just start with my colleague. His name is David Kraus, also from the Wilderness Society. He is our deputy director in Alaska and has worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service on the remote Yukon River tributaries for years. Much of his professional development is focused on how public health, community development, and conservation objectives can be simultaneously achieved. So welcome, David. I'd also like to introduce William Matthews, one of the directors of We Don't Give Up. William, as many of you from the Liturgists community likely know, is known around the world as a singer and songwriter, a popular recording artist whose songs are sung in churches all over the world. And his real passion is around artistry and advocacy. He's been part of the Not Who We Are campaign to address issues of blatant racism, sexism, and xenophobia, and serves on the board of the advocacy group, the Micah Challenge, to address climate change. Welcome, William. And then next, I'd like to introduce Jamie, who is also a liturgist host. Jamie has a deep familiarity with the language used by those who come from authoritarian backgrounds and want to return to a feeling of wholeness for their bodies. Her work focuses on deep reconciliation at a mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical level. Really excited to have you be part of the conversation, Jamie. And then finally, I'd love to introduce Christian Atkins. And this is Christian making his directorial film debut as part of We Don't Give Up. He's a cinematographer and videographer who's applied his talents to mediums from music video to commercials to television and still photography. We're just really thrilled that Christian went up to the Arctic Refuge and applied his storytelling skills and his great eye to talking about the Gwich'in people and to talking about this and to creating We Don't Give Up. So really excited to have you here, Christian. And before we get started and really talk to some of the folks who are part of We Don't Give Up, I thought it might be good to just spend a moment. I know many of you saw the film, but I thought it might be good to have David start the conversation by giving kind of a 2-minute synopsis of the Arctic Refuge. I think it's kind of an issue that many people have not talked about, that many people don't know about. So I'd love to hear from him about what is the Arctic Refuge? Where is it? Why does it matter? And why is its future under threat? So I'll just kick it over to David.
Sure. Thanks, Adit. Yeah, so as we learned in the film, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the ancestral lands of the Gwich'in and Inupiat people, is an amazing 19.2 million acre landscape tucked into the northeast corner of Alaska. It's a landscape of incredible ecological and cultural value. It's a place where an ecosystem is whole and functioning, and it's this wholeness and health that helps traditional practices to continue across seasons and across time. There are actually even two kind of neighboring Canadian conservation areas across the eastern border of the refuge that are also a recognition of this landscape's ecological and cultural importance. So yeah, most immediately, the refuge is threatened by an oil development program. And here, leasing, exploration, and commercial development activities would all occur on the coastal plain, which is the section of the refuge at the very top of the refuge, in the very top of Alaska. And this is a pretty fragile place, as a lot of places in the Arctic are. So Arctic oil development is, safe to say, it's big bad business, and would definitely have devastating impacts on this very pristine location. Oil exploration, the act of looking for oil, requires a significant amount of vehicle and machine traffic on the landscape, primarily during winter months. And this is when polar bears are in their dens with their newly born cubs. If things advance to a place of potential oil finds and commercial production was on the horizon, here's where the risk to habitat fragmentation from roads and pipelines would occur. There'd be a lot of noise and air and water pollution as a result of this industrialization in the coastal plain. So it's these processes and the impacts of industrial oil development that really threaten the health and the integrity of the coastal plain and the surrounding landscape as a result.
Thanks, David. Well, I imagine for you in Alaska, the Arctic Refuge is something that is often a conversation that you all are talking about. But for Jamie, William, and for Christian, I imagine the Arctic Refuge is not kitchen table talk usually. So I'd be curious, how much did you know about the refuge before going up there, and what made you want to travel on multiple planes over a crazy huge mountains to actually get there? And I'll kick it to Jamie. Like, why did you want to go up there? What made you want to go on this adventure?
I have a hard time saying no to Indigenous arena in general. I think for me it was twofold. It was, number one, I was really interested in going to not only a new place for me, but a place that hardly anyone ever gets to see, with some of the people I love the most in the world. That was just a great offer to be put on the table in front of me. But then upon finding out, the why behind the what of what we were doing, and admittedly, I didn't know very much about it. I didn't know what had happened with the tax bill. I didn't know much of anything before I went. So in the time period before saying yes to going and actually going, in the research that I did prior to going up there, became very aware of the fact that this desperately needs our attention, and aware of one of the reasons why it often doesn't get our attention is because it is so remote. It is so far. This is, the fight of the Indigenous people on that land is very different from the fight of the Indigenous people in the lower 48 states, because it's functionally accessible for a lot of people to get to those places and to see what's going on there. So it's a lot more difficult for us to understand what's really going on in a place that's just so far and so remote. So I wanted to learn more once I had started learning more, if that answer makes sense.
Totally. It totally makes sense. William, I'm curious, this was obviously also new for you, so I'm curious, what surprised you about being out in the coastal plain? What kind of met your expectations, and what defied your expectations being out in just kind of this vast landscape?
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about what we were walking into. I was familiar with the Arctic, probably in the general way that people are familiar. I think when Anna Jane described the Arctic to me, or just said, "Hey, do you want to go to the Arctic?" I said, "Wait, polar bears?" Like, I instantly, that's what it connotated for me. Save the polar bears. I was like, "We got to save polar bears again? Okay, let's do it." And it was, I would say, to answer your question, I just didn't know how remote of a place the wildlife sanctuary is. And obviously the travel there alone, like I don't even usually go to Alaska. So to fly to Alaska felt like a lot. I was visiting New York City at the time. I live in Los Angeles. So I flew from New York to Fairbanks, Alaska, and then to get on all the commuter planes. So that was probably the thing I didn't expect was, I'd never been on a commuter plane in my life. So that was
Had any of you been on a commuter plane? I will say I haven't, so no. Will you do it again?
Yeah. Oh,
I didn't take the medicine. So you see in the film when Jamie's like, good drugs, right? Like the medicine, like to help with, flying and all that. What was it for, Jamie? Again, is it
motion sickness? It was Dramamine.
Motion sickness, yeah. Dramamine. Yes.
I didn't even really need it on the 9-seater as much as I did on that tiny plane. That was intense. Yeah.
I didn't think to bring it, so I didn't. The flight there was great, but when we left the refuge to head to Arctic Village, that one gave me real motion sickness. But so yeah, to answer your question, didn't expect that. One thing that I wanted to happen, but we didn't get to happen, was I wanted to see a grizzly bear so bad because they gave us bear spray, to have on us at all times. So Dan was like, we might see some bears, and we had to go through bear training. And so I was like, for all this training and to have to literally carry pepper spray with me at all times, a massive can of pepper spray, I wish I got to at least see some bears. That was one regret.
We saw a wolf from very, very, very far away, but beyond that, not too much.
It's probably best to see that wildlife from very, very far away. That's my perspective. Space and distance is good with grizzly bears. That's a tip for me, I'd say. Christian, I'm curious because you're a cinematographer. You're someone who's probably really attuned to kind of the noises, the light. Just kind of tell me a little bit from you, from that kind of from an artist's perspective, what was it like to be kind of in that space? What did it feel like for you?
I think being exposed to nature and being humbled by it and the size and the scope, it resets your internal clock and makes you feel like you matter more because you're a part of it all. And I think all I had to do was turn on the camera. You hear Jamie, you hear Will. They're very interesting people. And the reason that we were out there is so beautiful that I just felt humbled by the scope and the impact of the trip itself.
That's awesome. Well, one of the things that really struck me in kind of watching the video and watching as you all were trying to think about kind of conceptualizing the content was even though the refuge was really moving and impactful for you all, and it's kind of a once in a lifetime experience in this remote area, it seemed like what stuck with you all was your experience in Arctic Village and talking to some of the community members and really hearing their stories. That seemed to be the thing that most resonated with you about your trip to the refuge. And I'll just start with William and hear from you. What about those conversations really resonated with you, and why did that particular experience in the refuge, why was that something that just landed with you? I'll also just kind of, before you even get into that, I'll note that if folks have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll be collecting questions at the end of this Q&A, and if you have questions, we're happy to answer them on your behalf. So I'll leave that, and then William, I'll just go back to you. What about your experience in Arctic Village movement?
Yeah, I don't think we really knew what to expect or what we were walking into, especially something as important as the refuge, realizing that many of these people have been the subject of intense scrutiny, having this land, people have been trying to sell this land for a long time. And I think the thing that surprised me the most was the feeling of frankly tiredness that many of the community members had, to feel like all their life is just a fight. And honestly, that's what kind of gave us part of the direction for this film. Was I registered and with that same sentiment and feeling of, why does it feel like living in America is always a fight? And especially, I think I didn't know what to expect. So coming into the space and talking to Kelvin and Sarah, I mean, first off, they were just some of the most kind people, like just genuinely happy, kind, welcoming to strangers. They didn't know us from anybody, and they welcomed us. They took care of us, made sure we had everything we needed. When we showed up, they already had food for us. Like, they were very, hospitable for us. You know, they obviously don't have a lot of people that travel up there constantly, but I think that's what registered with me the most, was that these were folks just like everybody else, but the only difference is that they have a land that is constantly being contested. And that definitely puts a strain on how you're able to build your own community and how you're able to build the folks in your community when it's constantly under threat.
No, I saw you nodding, Jamie, and I thought about kind of even as I was reading your bio that you focus on the body and healing and kind of reconciliation, and really a lot of the film itself and We Don't Give Up is how hard it can be to create space for healing and for reconciliation when, to William's point, you're kind of constantly fighting. And I'd be curious if you felt that same kind of emotion and that same kind of challenge around healing while you were in the up in Arctic Village, and what your experience was like.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I will remember the most from the experience in Arctic Village was having a very brief aside, hardly a conversation, but a brief conversation with Sarah, where she was communicating the absurdity of the fact that there's this impression among predominantly white Americans, but just kind of Americans in general, that Indigenous people who live in the communities that look like Arctic Village, or the Gwich'in community, are they're living unhealthy in some way. There's some sort of the impact of because they don't have running water, or because X, Y, these things that we've associated with health and wellness here in white supremacist run, capitalist indoctrinated, United States of America. And she's like, you live in harmony with the land. We are well. We're well. We're more well than well. That's my paraphrase. But it's just, there's a deep wellness to that way of being that fundamentally they're trying to protect. Yes, they are trying to protect their rights, the fact that they have a right to continue to live in the way that they have lived for 30,000 years. They're trying to protect their wellness more than anything, because they are living extraordinarily well in communion with the land, and in their bodies being in such deep communion with the land. So I think that there is such an unmistakable, unmissable, and that's you kind of, when you first get there, for us, coming from, we were really grateful we went into the wildlife refuge first and then went to Arctic Village, because it was less of a shock, so to speak, from going from Fairbanks to Arctic and staying for an extended time in Arctic Village. We went from civilization to utterly remote to Arctic Village. And I think it kind of feels like when you're at the eye doctor and they put you have to adjust the lenses to get the right lens, and it took a couple hours to get kind of the embodied vision of adjusting the lenses and being oh no, this is beyond beautiful. Everything about the way that they are living here is it's just it makes me feel incredibly just angry and sad about what capitalism has done and what white supremacy has done to rip that away from people whose bodies know better.
Yeah, and I'm curious, William. I saw in the film, and this is actually for all of you, I saw a number of times in the film kind of this idea that we have so much to learn from Indigenous communities about how to engage with nature, how to be kind of better stewards. Have you all, since coming back to the Arctic Refuge, are there things that you've adopted or things that you learned from Arctic Village that you are adopting to your everyday lives, the habits that you've changed as a result of that trip?
Yeah, well, there's this theme that I noticed. We highlighted a little bit in the film as best as we can, but a lot of the way that the Gwich'in languaged their reality was very enmeshed between them and the land. That was a unique feature. And I don't think I'd ever really heard a group of people talk in that way. It was as if what happens to the land is actually what's happening to them. It wasn't simply, and they even have words and then in their language that really communicate those ideas that I just don't think we have in the English language to communicate the interconnectedness of spirit, soul, body, earth, like all these things coming together, and to touch one is to touch the other. I mean, Gideon says it right in the beginning where, you start doing this, where do you think it's going to go? Like up into space somewhere? Like, no, like it's here, And then Kelvin's talking about the caribou. He goes, it's about the whole world. It's not, this isn't just about the caribou, And it's funny because it was such a rebuke in such a subtle way to the way that we frame reality as Western people, that we see things as separate and abstracted. And for the Gwich'in, it is not so. And that, I think, for me was one of the biggest takeaways that I walked out with, was to learn, and I still feel like it is a learning experience of how to see myself as interconnected in the natural world. And so for me, I live in Los Angeles, and so we have certain things. We recycle, we try to be healthy, but honestly, I started looking at the city differently because I instantly started realizing, if you've ever lived in Hollywood, you realize how dirty it is and just how much trash is everywhere. And now when normally I'm like, well, that's the city's job. And now I've been actually thinking, maybe I need to get a group of people and really clean up La Brea Avenue, because this is my city. I live here. This is my home too. I'm part of this natural world. And so it's been something that I've been asking myself, even while editing the film with Christian, is, okay, what can I do? What can I do? And if it's just, hey, this one street on La Brea or on Hollywood Boulevard that you can actually take care of or try to take care of, that matters. And truthfully, I think that came from the Gwich'in.
That's great. Christian, I know that you were kind of behind the camera, but you shot some really kind of powerful conversations, and you were in some kind of intimate places talking to people about some really emotional stuff. I'm curious, kind of, how did you approach that conversation, and how did you kind of create a space of safety, frankly, so that those conversations could happen? Oops, you're on mute, Christian. Sorry.
Sorry. For the most part, William did a bulk of the interviews. So, his vibe, his energy, along with the other liturgists, they kind of led the way. But when they would leave and I would go back, times with Gideon, we got to talking about some real serious stuff. And I think that, I don't want to label myself in any, extreme way, but I just felt like the passion that he had for his culture and what he felt entitled to reflected me. So a lot of those moments where he's pointing out his ancestors or looking at the map, you think about how many years it takes for somebody to have this weight on them and to kind of live through it and struggle through it and learn through it and try to affect the next generation. What kind of person it takes to have the hope for that? What kind of people, the community, him and Sarah, I can't even, speak enough on Sarah and her passion and through the years for her. She's been fighting, it seemed like, just their entire lives. And so it's just humbling, and it gives you a responsibility to think about, to not take for granted and to appreciate what you have. But those are some real conversations there.
Can I add to what Christian just said?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I love how Christian, we did some shared interviews, like you said, but then he did one or two kind of solo, or maybe like Mike went or Jamie or whoever. But I could tell Gideon took a real liking to you. Like you guys, like really, you guys kind of bonded. Like it was he liked you, and walking.
I don't want to describe myself in a way that makes him look bad. That's all.
Whatever. He walking into Gideon's home. I mean, when Christian talks about the weight that they're carrying, it really manifests and you see it in his cabin, the things that are hanging on his walls. Yeah. It's like the history of he's documenting the history of his people. And, and Kelvin said it best. He was like, there's after me, there might not be any more. And so there was a real weight and soberness. So to see that Gideon had been keeping the history from the decades, and the newspaper clippings and the files. And I mean, he was getting into the weeds. I mean, we couldn't put a lot of that in the documentary, but he was getting into real legal disputes and the weeds of their fight for this land and the promises from the federal government that never materialized. And you could tell that this weight of him like going, I have to represent the people that have gone before me and tell our story, because otherwise it won't get told or no one will remember. And so I think with you, all of them carry that, but especially with Gideon, you could see, that's why Sarah called him the what did she call him? The tribal officer? What did she say? Operations officer. Like,
Chief operations officer, yeah.
Chief operations officer, right? She was like, because he's taken on that mantle of, I have to remember what other people are not either able to remember or refuse to remember. And so I think seeing us kind of sparked them a little bit, because they were talking about their stories, especially in the war, Kelvin and he was, and then they would look at me and Christian, and they would actually recognize, we didn't show that in the film, but I remember at one point Kelvin looks at us and he's like, you understand what we're talking about. I saw the way they treated Black men in the war. Like he said that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that Kimberly Benjamin from on the chat asked the question of, with Black communities facing our own version of a modern genocide, gentrification and police brutality, what are some practical ways to use our collective pain and build a bridge with Indigenous communities and try to restore our society and environment? I know that's a heady question, but it's a good one. How do we take this pain and kind of turn it into something that is activism? And I know, William, that's something that you're passionate about, and Jamie as well. So if you all have thoughts, I'd welcome it, and Christian as well.
Yeah, I don't know what Jamie's going to say, but I won't talk. I want Jamie to talk about anger and how to feel use anger if she can. She can say also anything else she wants to say. But I'm not going to be the man telling the woman what to say. But again, using the context of what the Gwich'in taught us about interconnectivity, one of the things that I think Black people collectively have to realize is not only is our pain similar and our struggles similar, there are many Black people who come from Native descent, I mean, that's a big deal. My sister texted me. She saw the film, and she just actually texted me 10 minutes ago, and she goes, we're part of them too. We come from them too. A lot of us come from them too. And our stories have been so diverged, and they've been so separated, that I think what we're really beginning to do now is to begin to bring together the collective liberation struggle, that Black liberation and Native liberation are not two separate tracks. They're fighting against the same system of capitalism that use Black and brown bodies and Indigenous bodies for its own profiting gain. And so to answer the question, I guess as best as I can, part of the ways we built the bridge is to listen. That's why we did this film, was to hear, to actually center marginalized people and to listen. And I say that at the end of the film, like when you listen to the tenor of Sarah's voice, of Charlie's voice, of Kelvin, it's not just hearing words and concepts. I want you to feel the vibration and the energy that these people are resonating with. So listening on a deep, deep, deep level, I think that's something we have to do with each other in a way that we're not used to doing. And that's going to be listening to their stories, listening to them as themselves, and as best as we can, and we have obviously this film's doing that, and many other pieces of work are telling those stories. So I think that's the first step for us, and we might be removed physicality wise. I live in Los Angeles, they are in Arctic Village up in northern Alaska. But that's why we put that clip at the end where the House representative, she was talking like, just because certain people don't live on that land doesn't mean they don't have ancestral ties. And so we have to start thinking of this land as part of ours, collective, not ownership ours, like horizontal ours, and really fighting to save and protect our ancestral land, because as Kelvin said, it's the whole world. It's not just here, it's ours.
That's great. Jamie, oh yeah, Christian, go right ahead.
I'm just saying William's great. That's all I'm saying.
Sharing his appreciation. It's a good thing, William. And Jamie, I'd love to hear, William said you had some kernels of wisdom regarding anger and how to use anger. So I'd love to kind of hear from you about that.
I love that I have become an anger expert. I suppose. Yeah, it's hard to kind of like edit myself on like how little I need to say about it, because there's a lot that I could say about the power of anger, and how it can be used as a transformative force for good, and how it is to be used as a transformative force for good. But the first thing I'll say is one of the impacts actually of white supremacism, white supremacy, settler colonialism, and particularly as it relates to white evangelical Christianity, is the vilification of anger as a restorative force. One of the things that Andre Henry actually tweeted something just 2 days ago, I think, and I was gonna look it up, but I was afraid I would close down the video if I tried to look for it. I could use my phone. But it was the effect of like, you know what? It's worth it. I don't want to paraphrase Andre, because that's like, that's going to be 1,000 times worse than what he actually said, because what he always says is brilliant, and I can find it pretty quickly.
I do love that thought about like, you're right. White supremacy and a white supremacist culture vilifies anger from oppressed people.
Yes.
And says that we're victimizing ourselves by being angry, rather than simply a natural reaction and response to brutality.
Yes, and also vilifies anger itself, calling it sin. And so therefore saying, oh, well, that's an internal character flaw if you're angry. And what Andre said that I think is brilliantly stated, reading history, seeing how vicious white supremacy has been, how it's evolved in the behavior of present day white people, just makes me want to be more defiant. With all disrespect, maybe, I don't know if I should say it or not, F, I would say the word, but we'll just be clean. F, white approval and white comfort, and not overseers. This is this thing, is like, the way in which white supremacy wants to claim it's keeping the peace is by maintaining decorum. And so it will vilify the deeply correct anger from Indigenous people, from Black people, because how is anger not an appropriate response to what's going on and what has been going on for everything from, 400 years to 30,000 years. Or, I think what Mike said in the documentary is really compelling about kind of going from 30,000 to 300 to 30 to 3. And like for such an extended period of time, they were custodians of that land beautifully. And then the last 300 years, look at what's happened. So I think recognizing, and gosh, again, there's so much I could say about this, but one of the things I do want to say, kind of bringing up anger and piggybacking off of what William said, is speaking to and for white people in the way to kind of do allyship in a way that like a starting point that's appropriate is like, don't try and tone police anger. Just don't. Like, that's one of the things that happened. Our very first interview was with Kelvin, and he laid into us minutes after we got there. Appropriate. It set the tone perfectly for the rest of the time there, because his tone in our direction was like, oh, this again? You guys here again? Like, kind of in Like, you're going to profit off of this. And we're going to see nothing. We've been doing this for thousands of years, and you guys make hobbies out of this. And so can we as the liturgists or the liturgist community do everything to heal that? No. But the first place you can go in mitigating further harm is letting Kelvin yell. I mean, he didn't yell, but letting him, like, take that anger out, because we deserve, quite honestly, to have that anger taken out on us, which, again, and I say we, I mean white people, not William or Christian in the room, but myself and Mike and Michael. And I feel like something really sacred happened in the room when there was space made for that. And I don't want to take the whole time talking about anger. I could talk about anger for a long time, but I think
next podcast.
In what William is saying about, like, listening is step one. Listening and not interrupting when you feel uncomfortable, because anger is appropriate. When appropriate anger comes in, when the anger that belongs, sit with it, feel it, take it in, because we do deserve to be the people who that anger comes in the direction of. Like, that anger has been 300 years in the making, 400 years in the making for Black folks. Like, I mean, it's deserved.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other piece that we often talk about, and maybe this is a good question for David, is also honoring the leadership of Indigenous communities, and that they have been the ones fighting to protect these places for so long, and really being thoughtful about the space that you take up often. And I will say this is someone who's a conservationist. And David, I know that you've thought a lot about this and how you're working in Alaska. Just how do we support Indigenous communities without speaking for and taking space of Indigenous communities?
Yeah, it's a great question, Adit. I think many of the themes that have emerged already during our chat is, the importance of listening and feeling. And I think, those are some of the important ingredients that lay the foundation for, how this work should move forward. And so taking that time to visit, to understand anger, to understand perspectives and value systems, and the connections of all these pieces are fundamental and foundational in terms of how to be a professional conservationist, as you will.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get into some of the nitty-gritty fun questions regarding video. Maybe for you, Christian. They said, how many hours of Rose Ingrid Gracia? How many hours and hours of footage did you have, and how did you decide kind of which parts to use and kind of the tone and direction of the film? And I know this is you and William as co-directors, but yeah, how did you go about this process?
I see another question by Chris that kind of will help me segue into Rose's question. But I used Blackmagic Pocket Cinemas. I just felt like it would be small enough and nifty enough to get all of the information that we would need, but it also had enough, I guess, specs and color range that I knew we could get the colors out in post and do everything that we could with it. And then also just being able to record on solid-state hard drives that plug right into the camera let me use like 1 terabyte like for everything while we were out in the refuge, and then another terabyte while we were in the village, and not have to switch cards or have to worry about storage or anything like that. And of course, I backed it all up. And I just had some Canon zoom lenses, and just a small little handheld setup. I did also bring a gimbal, a little tilted gimbal out there for some of those large expanding shots, which I thought did really well. But 4K, use the 4K out there. And then, just 2 terabytes of media there, which shooting at, I didn't shoot it all in 4K, but so we didn't even think about how much time we were looking. It's a lot of footage, and it's a lot of stuff that, there's a whole nother story inside of it.
Yeah.
Just on more personality sides, but just trying to keep it in a nice range of attention or what I felt was appropriate for a short film that I had seen on the same kind of topics and issues. And as far as the story and the tone, in the beginning, we made it more about the liturgists themselves and trying to capture their experience and the way that they had, evolved through the trip. But just in different iterations and feedback from the Wilderness Society and the attention to detail, the story kind of developed more.
Me being a stickler.
I love it. We loved it.
The right thing. As much as I think that we're planning originally, so good call.
But she was right, obviously, and Anna brilliant as well, and the story just kept evolving and different influences from different places. Just and Will his narration on the project also allowed the story to kind of bring about the spirit and the quality. Because William's a great speaker, he knows what he's talking about and he cares, and I think that came out a lot as well. And I just kind of tried to put puzzle pieces where it needs to be to match what was important.
Oh, there's requests for deleted scenes on the side.
Yeah, there is. Can I just quote on Christian, though? Let me just say, Chris Atkins is a brilliant cinematographer who has a keen eye for beauty. That's what he has. And so I just felt like a kid in the candy shop because I'm going, here's this guy who's able to bring out such beauty out of everything. I mean, when we were there, the levels, he was getting down on the ground, getting blades of grass, like with the wind.
Yeah.
Yes, you remember.
Just in case.
Yeah, lots of footage. But it was very much like you were attentive to the space and wanting to honor the space with capturing its essence. And that's what I really appreciated most about having you on the trip. And even like bringing that out of us. You forced us to talk a lot while we were in the refuge and the village, because we were just, chatting, making jokes or whatever. And you're like, talk about what you're feeling right now. You really pushed all of us to a whole nother level. And obviously look at the footage. Once you guys see it in 4K, my God, Christian, I'll just say this, Christian's going places, y'all, you're going to know him as a famous director. I promise you. So I feel privileged enough that he did this film. And I think, when we look up one day and see him winning an Oscar and Emmy, we're going to be like, oh, that was the guy who like told the Gwich'in story. So
you can say we knew him when.
We really can. I'm not being small about that. That's a very real thing.
Well, I know we're almost at time. We wanted to do about 45 minutes, and I wanted to close with just kind of a reflection from each of you. And I'd love to just kind of hear from you if you could have people who watched the film or who were part of this conversation kind of take away one thing from today. What would that be? And then I'll also close with you, David, specifically, like how we can close with you on just kind of opportunities to take action. But I'll start with Jamie on my left here.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say, again, it's hard to narrow one thing, but I will speak again. Yeah. Well, there might be two facets of the one because that's my brain, but I would say the primary takeaway would be, again, from me as a white person to white people who are wondering what do we do about this? Where do we start? Where do we begin? I think one of the best places to begin is in understanding that the history that you were taught about the country that you live in, that you were told is yours, that history that you've been taught is a lie. All of it, every part of it. And until you do the work to understand that, and I'll say we do the work to really understand that and listen to the truth, listen to the actual history, the extremely violent history of how we as white people got to be where we are and how we got to be here. Until we understand that there is more truth than we've ever been taught, and now a lot of that truth has been made illegal to teach by our current administration. Educate yourself instead as much as you can, and a lot of that will be listening to non-white people, to people of color, to Black people, to Indigenous people about what the truth is. Listen with humility, and understand that you actually don't. It's not that you don't know everything, it's that we really don't know anything about the truth of this country. And that has to be the place where we start.
That's great. Christian. Oops, I think you might be on mute.
Can't hear you.
All right, here I go. Hot seat. Family, connectivity, community, the world, and how we all relate to each other. It's real. There's a collective conscience, a collective spirit. We all care, or we're supposed to care. I think we all really do in our hearts, but we are just distracted. I think being in silence and not being distracted helped me see where I fit in it all, and it gives projects like this and expanding the narrative more purpose. So, the affirmation is my biggest takeaway: who I am and what we're all meant to do, which is love and help.
I love it. William.
Yeah, I love what Jamie said about the listening piece. One of the things we had to do with this film was listen. And my biggest takeaway is to always listen, to always be open, and to carry with me. It was a reminder for me that we all carry both grief and hope, and that we carry one in each hand and never one more than the other. And Anna Jane Joyner, who we also need to shout out, who is so crucial as a producer on this film, she gave us this line that really anchored us through the recording process of this, which was, we may not, like, to paraphrase, she basically was like, we may not win this fight, but it's courage to show up. It's courage to show up and to witness, to see these people for who they are and the beautifulness that they carry on the inside and out. And it's courage for us to speak justice and to do the right thing and to advocate for them because they are us. And so I do so as a listener, as somebody that is listening to their grief, but also listening to their hope. Both things really, it instilled something in me, especially during the pandemic, was the essence of this film, which is we don't give up. And even when things look bleak, which outside of a Joe Biden presidential nomination, it looks a little bleak. Doesn't mean we don't resist, though. And so regardless of what happens in the fall, we're going to do both. And that to me was what I took away with, was just a deep reminder of everything my ancestors taught me and everything that their ancestors taught them. We don't give up.
I love it. And I'll close with you, David. I know a lot of folks in the chat have asked how they can take action and what they can do to support the Gwich'in in the fight for the refuge. So I'd love to hear you share kind of what's next and how folks can help.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the fight is definitely, unfortunately, far from over. But we need everybody to get involved and to stay involved and to keep an eye on all the moving parts of this campaign. So I'd really encourage folks to, follow the coalition, follow the Gwich'in Steering Committee, follow the Wilderness Society, and many of these other partners who are working so hard to protect this land of such, cultural and ecological importance. There's going to be a lot of junctures in the weeks ahead around taking action. And this could range from contacting elected officials to contacting banks or oil companies or even insurers. And so bringing all these pieces in the collective efforts of everybody together is going to be crucial to keeping oil and gas development out of the coastal plain. And so stay tuned and definitely feel free to step up and to fight this fight.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
And thank you, Adit.
Where did Adit go?
She disappeared all.
Anna.
Is it a party now? Is this where we can have fun?
We can do what we want.
Professional. Close it out, William.
I know. I guess, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe you should give
All
us
right. Well,
fiction. And
I'm so used to church, so I'm like, may
I
the
know.
Lord bless you and keep you, and may His face shine upon you, and give you peace. Yeah, thank you so much to all of you, the panelists who have been on this. Thank you, Christian, for your beautiful cinematography and direction. Thank you, Jamie, for your beautiful voice and perspective, and thank you for helping us. It's David, right? Yeah, thank you for helping us really do this call to action, because there's pressure that we can put on these corporations to not back leasing in the Arctic Refuge. So thank you for leading us and sharing your insights for how we can keep and continue this fight. All right, guys.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks, Adit.
I was
We
like,
did it.
until she's
I just did a magical disappearing act. Apologies. I'm sure David gave some amazing wisdom. I agree with him. Go to Wilderness Society and learn more about the fight to protect the Arctic Refuge. Take action against Chevron. Fight for drilling and support partners like Native Movement and the Gwich'in Steering Committee, who are at the very front of this fight to protect the Arctic Refuge and leading the way. And they've done so for thousands and thousands of years, and they need our voices and they need our help to make that happen. So with that, after my disappearing act, I will say thank you all so much for taking the time this evening. Thanks for watching the film. Share We Don't Give Up with your friends. And thanks for being part of the fight. Talk soon.
and vote.
And vote.
Bye all.